All right, we're on Signed, Sealed, Delivered with Jamie Hope, and today I have Tom Gantert with me. Tom, you are managing editor of the Michigan Capital Confidential, and that is a nonprofit. Is it like a news organization? And it's through the Mackinac Center of Public Policy.
Yeah, it's a nonprofit news site with a, I guess, free market news perspective
Okay,
or libertarian news perspective,
gotcha.
limited
And how long?
government, limited government news perspective, I guess you would call it.
Limited government. And then, but you are a classically trained or educated journalist. Like you went to journalism school, right?
At Michigan State.
Okay.
It wasn't all of that.
But you
I mean,
still went through a program. You didn't just jump
well,
on and start.
I tell you what Michigan State's journalism program was like. It was, and I mean, what I really learned is by working at newspapers. I started at the Jackson Citizen Patriot when I was 18 in 1983. I was a senior in high school, and I was a sports writer. But when you look at what I went through at journalism school at Michigan State University, uh, it was just to get a degree. I mean, I was everything I was learning was through working at daily newspapers, and I worked at
Mhm.
the Lansing State Journal when I went to Michigan State University, and a lot of the professors at Michigan State University or the adjuncts were actually kind of like failed journalists at Michigan at the Lansing State Journal. So it's like it's like
Really?
all right, so
Nice.
yes,
But you worked for actual newspapers. You worked for real
yes,
publications. So I mean it's not like you're
up,
just some guy in his
up
basement
till
blogging away, showing up places.
yeah, I worked at the Ann Arbor News until it closed in
Yeah.
2009.
Okay.
I always say I didn't quit newspapers; they quit me. So my newspaper
Oh,
closed in 2009.
gotcha. So today I wanted to have you on. We decided we were going to talk about media bias because obviously that seems to be a problem right now. And the way I see it, like I have questions, and I'm sure a lot of people have questions because I mean, it seems like there's really people think that there's real truly no, it's like the left, they'll quote, their publications and then the right, they'll quote their publications and nobody trusts each other's publications anymore. Is there actual fact behind that or what do you think?
Well, if newspapers or news sites or whatever you want to call them, websites, are upfront about what they are, and are transparent about what their viewpoint is, I think there is value for it. Like Snopes, we all know
Mhm.
Snopes is a very liberal uh, organization, but it
Mhm.
has value. If you want to question something, like if there's a report out on the internet, a Facebook meme, which is what Snopes is doing a lot of now, fact checking Facebook memes. But if you want to go out and see if those are true, Snopes will do that and do it well, you know.
So you
But
so you actually trust now
I don't trust them. But
you
I
don't
but
you don't
but what
trust
they
them.
do
Okay.
is has value. Okay.
Okay.
I
Okay.
don't trust Snopes for another reason, which we can talk about later in the
Okay.
show if you'd want.
Sure.
And it has to do with my own website about why I don't
Uh-huh.
trust.
Okay.
Um, do you want to hear the story now?
Interesting. Yeah, sure. Go for
Okay.
it.
So for my news site, and I think about 2011, there was a report out that Muslims did not have to abide by what I want to say the Obamacare
Mm,
mandate that you had to
okay.
get health insurance.
Mm,
It was an obscure thing, but it was said at a speech. We were a Tea Party speech, and I said, "Hey, well, let's go fact check this." And we used Snopes. Um, and Snopes came out with part of the story we used, which you can still read online. Said that it came out with their conclusion, which was indefinite. I think it was. Okay, so that's okay. We used it. We cited it. So about 2 years later, I'm online, and this one guy accuses me online of fabricating what Snopes said. And I said, we didn't fabricate it. We linked to it. Well, what had
mhm.
happened was Snopes had changed its analysis conclusion,
Oh,
which is
gotcha.
fine.
Sure.
But what they didn't do is they didn't cite that they changed it. So this guy,
Oh.
he was a far left lunatic,
Mhm.
accusing me of making up what Snopes said you quoted them inaccurately, you made this up. And so I went to Snopes and said, hey, what happened here? You guys
Yeah.
said this, and they sent me back an email that's basically was, hey, we made changes. I said, well, did you make a change here? Can you make a note of it? And they never got back to me. So my point was I got burned. Now I was able to
Sure.
prove that this actually, what the original post was, because somebody, thank God, in another website had cut and pasted their entire response and
Oh,
posted it on
wow.
his Facebook. So I was able to see the original response, because at the time I wasn't the only one reporting on this.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I
that's
was
kind of
able to get,
crappy.
yeah, I
That's
was able
crappy.
to,
They should be request if they wanted to have any kind of. I mean, there already been cited people don't trust them now because of the whole story. We can go into that at some point too about what we found out about them. But you would think if they wanted to restore any credibility whatsoever, that they would actually, if they have to change things, because sometimes obviously new facts come to light,
right.
probably, and to update that and let them know we changed this as of this date because of such and such.
Well, I've been doing kind of a what do you want to call bias check in newspapers for, I double check for 12 years now. So
Wow.
let me tell you how it started. Do you remember when Sarah Palin was vice president with McCain, and she was announced
Oh
as the
yeah.
vice president?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So it made a lot of stories, and there was a political news story that came out, and it quoted a guy called Matthew Dallek, Dallek, as saying that she was the most inexperienced vice president in modern history. And I was like, wow, that's really, that's a tough thing to say, you
Yeah.
know. And he was only identified in the story as, quote, as a presidential scholar. Okay.
Mhm.
So I was like, okay, so I started to look into it. Who's Matt Dallek? Who was the source? Well, as
Mhm.
I looked into it, Matt Dallek was someone who was a speechwriter for then the Democratic House Minority Leader, Richard Gephardt, a Democrat, you know.
Oh,
And if
jeez.
you're a
Uh-huh.
speechwriter, you're a top aide.
Yeah.
So my point was, it's like Politico didn't want to say in their story about Palin that, oh, by the way, this guy is also was a top aide for one of the top Democrats in the country, because
Right.
then it takes all the power out of his statement. If you just call him
Mhm.
a
Sure.
presidential scholar, which is the story's still up, you can still, because I checked before I got on.
Mhm.
But if you want to go back and look at the story, it's just calls him a presidential scholar, which gives what he says a lot more weight. If
Mhm.
you can quote Matt Dallek, okay, but if you're going to, you also got to say what his political motivation is, and his political
Right.
motivation, he's a well-known Democrat,
Mhm.
and a Democrat criticizing a Republican vice president candidate is not as newsworthy to, as if you just say it's a presidential scholar, you know.
Absolutely. Because, well, obviously, I mean, you're admitting bias and in some regard, or you are tainted at least by, a perspective that, you admittedly worked for a particular party. So,
Correct. So, there's when people talk about political bias, I find not many people follow the news industry like I do, and
sure.
not a lot of people know about what's come out about political bias. The things that I
Mhm.
see that shape my opinion on it. So my
Sure.
question to you was, I think there was three things that I think it was three things. Um, Dave Challen, yeah, actually, three things. Journalist. Do you
Mhm.
remember journalist we talked about? I wanted to
Yes.
go over
Yep.
them.
Yeah.
WikiLeaks, which is something that
Uh-huh.
came out,
For
and then
sure.
the other one is Dave Chalian, who
Yeah.
I wanted to go
Is
over
that the
those three incidents.
I want to
So
start with journalists because I have never heard of this until you told me about it, which I mean, of course, why wouldn't we? Because the main people that are involved, a lot of them, why would they self-report that they were, engaged in this activity? So tell us what journalist is.
journalist was uncovered by the Daily Caller. Basically,
Hmm.
what it was, there was a private chat room that a lot of far left people were getting on. A lot of them were reporters, some of them academia. Um,
Reporters like from mainstream news,
yeah,
like
from
more of
growing
the
mainstream
larger.
names, like the one
Mhm.
I was talking to was just got hired by the Washington Post. Okay,
Okay.
and so it was on journalists where you saw things like they were having discussions. Well, if somebody criticized Obama, let's paint these critics as racist. Who cares if they really are? That's an effective way to take out
Is
what
That's
they're
what
saying.
they were. You're saying that's what they were doing on
That's what
journalists?
that's what was on the chats and the emails that these people posted
Wow.
on a very private chat room.
So there's an admission right there that they are going to try and create a narrative to brand people racist if they disagree with the
Yeah, and
president.
it goes back to this
Yeah.
was back 2010, I want to say.
Okay.
So there's one specific reporter that at the time, his name was David Weigel. It's Weigel. And he had just got hired by the Washington Post, and he was hired, ironically, to cover the conservative grassroots movement. Okay. Now there was some belief that when they hired him, they believed him to be of conservative mindset, which he's not. Okay. So he was on this thing, and one of the things that he did that got him in trouble was he said that Matt Drudge was having physical problems at that point. Said he should solve his physical problems by, quote, setting himself on fire. Okay. You know Drudge Report is, don't you?
Oh yeah, Matt Drudge, absolutely. And I have we might have to talk about him later too, because I have questions about him. But go ahead.
So he said, set himself on fire. The other thing he said, he referred to Ron Paul followers as Paul-tards. Okay. So there was all these statements he made. So what happened was the Washington Post, he apologized several times, but the Washington Post made the decision that they had to fire him because we can't have somebody who's saying these things about conservative covering the conservative movement. Okay?
Right.
So they fired him, okay, in 2010. And the theme here, ironically, so what happens long picture is 2015, 5 years later, they hire him back. Okay.
Probably without much fanfare, I'm sure.
Right,
they
exactly.
Probably just kind of hired him on quietly.
And that's what you see. It's like when there is no punishment for some pretty serious journalism ethic violations in this industry if you're liberal. From what I've seen.
Are you seeing? Do you think that you're seeing do you think that there is a crisis of journalistic ethics going on right now?
I don't know if it's ethics. I think there's a couple things going on where what's being reported now is a worldview, as opposed to reporting, he said, she said, or reporting facts in a story. So
they're editorializing it in a way, right?
Well, I mean, like for instance, the New York Times does a lot of stories on Michigan education, and I look at these stories and I see a lot of faulty reporting. And then I see a lot of bias. Let's
qualify the statement right now. If people are saying, "Oh no, they're not biased," why would newspapers? I've always had a problem with this. Left, right, I don't care. Democrat, Republican. Why would newspapers endorse a candidate? Like Lansing State Journal, New York Times, why would, as soon as you endorse a candidate, we're going to, the average consumer of news is automatically going to go, okay, well, we know what side they're on, so they're going to have bias reporting, right? I mean, that's what I think. That's what a lot of people think.
I think traditionally newspapers thought of themselves as like the go-to place for advice, or, kind of like the shepherd of the community. Here's what's best for the community. As the newspaper, here's what we think you should do. I mean, traditionally, that's what it is.
But I mean, that's stupid. Well, right? I think it's stupid.
It is. And
report the news. We don't give two craps about what you group of individuals who are just report the news. Just tell us what happened. Don't tell us why don't make, try to put your own opinion in there why you think it happened, or don't try to, guess people's motives when you don't know for sure. Just report the dang news. How simple is that, right?
Well, let me go over the other examples I wanted to go over quickly about bias or the worldview point. There's another guy called David Chalian, Chalian, who was at the time, the CNN, or excuse me, he's now the CNN political director, but at the Times, he was the Washington bureau chief for Yahoo News. Okay, so in 2012, he's doing a broadcast, and there's a live mic, and the live mic catches him saying that he thinks that Mitt Romney, who was then running for president, would be happy to have a party with black people drowning. This is at the time of Hurricane Isaac. Okay. So it got
Wow.
caught on Hot Mic, and some people reported it. Some news sites and
Hmm.
blogs reported it. And so what Yahoo News had to do was fire him, because you can't
Hmm.
have your Washington bureau chief believing that. Now, if you
Right.
think about that statement, he actually believed that. He believed that the presidential candidate would be happy to have a party when black people were drowning. That's what he
You don't
believed.
think he was just saying it flippantly? You think he
No, it
wholeheartedly
was a hot
believed that?
mic, you know.
Hmm.
So my thing, it was something that just he said that I believe you have to take people at their word, you know. So if
Sure.
they say something like that, why wouldn't I
Fair
believe it,
enough.
you
Right.
know? So that's what he said. So
Hmm.
okay, so Yahoo News fires him in 2012. What is
Hmm.
this guy doing now? Now he is the CNN political director. Okay, so it's like I said, it's not so much what they say and the mistakes they make; it's just how they recover and where they go to. And I'll give you another example. Glenn Thrush, who at the time was a reporter for Political. Okay,
Hmm.
uh, he's the senior White House reporter writer for Political, and WikiLeaks comes out, and this is like 2016.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Hmm.
So he sends a copy of a story to the Clinton campaign chairman, John Podesta.
Hmm.
Okay. And he says in it, please don't share or tell anyone I did this. And then in another email
Right.
says, because I've become a hack. But what he's doing is he's taking an article he's going to write, and he's letting the Clinton campaign chairman proofread it and make
Hmm.
any suggestions or additions to the
Basically, he
story.
wants their stamp of approval before it goes out.
Right. That's as unethical as it gets.
Yeah.
Okay. So Glenn Thrush was with Political when he did this. Who's he working for now? The New York Times. You know. So so this is
Sure.
the the trend you see, is that when these people make these horrific gaffes in
Hmm.
judgment, they end up getting better jobs at the end. At the
Yeah,
end
you
of the
would
day.
think that they would almost become untouchable. What do you think are the consequences right now? I mean, obviously we're in a very divisive moment in, in our country. And it, goes like this every day. Someone posts an article, whether it's local, state, federal news, and and then you get the people on there that are like, "Oh, I see your bias again because of the way you reported," and then people are like, "Oh, no, they're not," and then like, "Yes, they are," and then they post their little, then they'll post it from their side, their take on it. So where do you think this is heading? I mean, do you is there any reconciliation in the future? Because it just seems like we're becoming divided. And like I said, nobody can even debate anymore using news in some way in those spheres a lot of times, because then people say, "Oh no, because look at the bias they did." Like, then they can quote what these guys did. And then and then of course you have your news on the right, which would be like your Breitbart and, things like that. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think uh, what I see out there is that when people want to debate, they'll cut and post a news site um, that has an article that's of the political opinion they have, and they'll post that. I see
Hmm.
that a lot. I see that on my own site where people want to debate about something we wrote, and they'll run an article from New York Times or Bridge Magazine, and in those articles are not facts. It's just quotes. Someone
Hmm.
said this, politician said this, someone from Michigan State said this, someone from the University of Michigan said this. But what I think, uh, I've had discussions with my sister, who's a far left liberal, about this, and she asked me about how do you fact check. I said,
Hmm.
well, the best way to fact check is to get the actual facts. So what are you talking about? Road funding? Then go look at, what road funding is, what the actual,
Hmm.
there's accounts out there. One of the things that when I think one of our bigger successes where the news site I work is what are the facts on school funding, because a lot of
Yeah.
unions were saying Snyder cut funding by $1 billion. Well, there's organizations out there like in Michigan called the Senate Fiscal Agency, which I think you're aware
Yeah.
of,
Hmm.
and they post the actual data, and now
Hmm.
you can talk about whether funding is enough or not enough or more, but you can't argue the actual dollar amounts. So
Right.
So if it goes up every year, you can't say funding was cut. Now you can say the increase wasn't enough, and then you can have a
Right.
debate. That's where I think you have the most healthy debates, is where you have them.
So it's just so people are using weasel words trying to describe to undercut their political opponents. A lot of times is what you're saying. So instead of saying the fund, even though it increased, they called a cut, like you said, because it wasn't enough of an increase from the prior increase or something to that effect.
Which is a legitimate debate, okay? But what's
Hmm.
not a debate is when you say school funding was cut, and then you post an article that erroneously reports that, and then that's what their point. That's their discussion. How many times do we see on Facebook in a political discussion where people just start posting mainstream articles like the Washington Post or New York Times, and that's their debate? Because
Yeah.
well, if the newspaper says it, it must be right, and it's just like, no, you should start challenging what newspapers report.
Yeah,
Like
because
the math.
it does get to the point where, yeah, you're it's just quotes, this person quoted it's almost like a grapevine. Then this person quoted this person, and yeah, where did the actual facts originate? What were the original facts
Well,
behind this?
and I see that in my profession a lot. I'll give you an example. It's like in the education industry, it's like classroom sizes. You know, how many newspapers you report? Oh, student classroom sizes are 40 according to, and they'll quote a teacher or a union member. Well, that's not. You don't have to quote a union member or a teacher to get classroom sizes. That's actually data that school districts provide you through usually a Freedom of Information Act. So that's where we get the
Right.
information from. So it's like that's that's what I think the problem I see right now in the industry is that is people's quotes and comments are replacing what the actual facts are. So that you
Right.
have.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a very valid point. And I think that that's something that people should on both sides recognize. And, I mean, it just seems like people want to be right. And I want to keep continuing this discussion. And I want to talk about WikiLeaks and the other points that we wanted to bring up. And we're going to do that here in a next segment. So hang on just one second. And for those listening, subscribe to Signed, Sealed, Delivered. And I will have Tom back on in part 2 here in just a moment. So hang tight.